So we've already looked at carbohydrates and we've looked at protein in previous videos, and if you haven't seen those videos, make sure to check them out. But today we're of course going to look at fat. We're going to look at where the fat actually makes you fat, and we're also going to look at why we need or don't need fat in the diet, and the different types of fat that we can find and consume in our diet. So let's jump in. So first off, does fat make you fat? So it's not as simple as a yes or no answer. There's a lot of other things we need to take into consideration. But what's very interesting is to actually understand where this statement came about. So many years ago, when people started to become overweight, the governments and the researchers noticed that while the health burden is increasing because people are overweight, and we need to do something about it. So looking at how we lose weight, the easiest approach would be to be in an energy deficit. In other words, consuming less energy in the form of food than what we are expending in the form of our basal metabolic rate or energy or your exercise expenditure. So to decrease our energy that's going in, we need to look at the calorie content of food. So this is where they saw that 1 gram of protein or 1 gram of carbohydrate contains 4 calories, whereas 1 gram of fat contains 9 calories, so it's more than double. So theoretically, it makes complete sense to cut out fat, because then we'll cut a lot of calories, which will then lead to a deficit, which will lead to weight loss, and all our problems will be solved. But unfortunately, fat adds a lot of flavor and enjoyment and texture and balance and depth to food. And that's why we all enjoy food that's cooked in fat so much. And people actually realize that, they're not enjoying their food as much, and companies actually started to realize that people aren't buying their products as much. So unfortunately, they then replace the fat with something else, and typically it would be something like sugar. Because sugar is a carbohydrate, in other words, it has half of the amount of calories than fat, and it has similar effects on, the body and enjoyment of food when it comes to fat, so how we perceive the food. So people, started to enjoy the food again. If we're looking at yogurt, for example, a low or fat-free yogurt would have less fat than a full cream, but typically have more sugar to kind of balance that out and still make it enjoyable. But unfortunately, sugar has its own problems, and that's where we're actually sitting at the moment. So if we're looking at just back to where the fat makes you fat, it can have an effect because of the fact that it is higher in calories, but we need to look at it in a balance and look at it in combination with carbohydrates and proteins, and which products we actually choose on the shelves and on the market, for example. And then we also need to take into consideration that fat is truly still important in the body, so we still need some fat in the diet. So that brings me to my second point, and whether we need fat. So yes, I've basically answered that already. We do need fat in the body. Fat has many functions it plays in the body. Specifically, it actually provides the body with vitamin A, D, E, and K, which are specifically fat-soluble vitamins. So without fat, we actually can't, store and absorb those vitamins. And then we also get our essential fatty acids, omega-3, 6, and 9 from fat. So we do definitely need fat in the diet. So those are just simple functions. It still also plays a lot of other functions in the body on a cellular and biological level. So we do need fat. So now, we do need fat, so how do we incorporate fat in the diet in a safe way? So this is what leads me to the third point. What type of fat do we get, and which should we be incorporating in the diet and not? So the first group of fat we get is our saturated fat. So when we're looking at the molecule on a chemistry level, all the bonds are filled. So in other words, it's saturated fat. So it's saturated. There's no more space for bonds to form. So what that basically just means that it's quite a stable fat, and that we typically find in our animal products. So in other words, the fat on your choppy or the skin of the chicken, or the fat that you typically naturally find in eggs, and then your dairy products as well. Fish also contains saturated fats and the like. So all animal products contain saturated fat. Some contain more in a serving than others, but they often, in most cases, contain saturated fat. In all cases, rather. So the next group is our unsaturated fat. So unsaturated fat typically comes from plant products. In other words, your nuts and seeds and olive oil and olives and avocado and so forth. So with unsaturated fats, we get two different types of unsaturated fats, our polyunsaturated fats and monounsaturated fats. But I don't want you to worry too much about that. If you're having a variety of different types of unsaturated fats like nuts and seeds and olives and olive oil and vegetable oils and so forth in your diet, you typically will be getting sufficient amounts of unsaturated fats in your diet. One exception is coconut. So coconut typically is saturated fat. So that's the only plant form of saturated fat that we find. And it typically more specifically contains medium chain triglycerides, which is actually absorbed quite differently in the body. But that's the only plant-based source of saturated fat. So back to unsaturated fat, it means that there's actually space for bonds to form because it's not saturated like your animal products would be. Which then leads us to the third and most dangerous form of fat, which is trans fats. So trans fats are very harmful to the body. We should be trying to avoid them at all costs. And they typically form when unsaturated fats are then which are unstable because of the fact that the unsaturated actually then get exposed to high temperatures or processing, for example, and then turn into a trans fat, which is quite harmful to our health, especially heart health. So you'll typically see on your products, it says trans fatty acid free, and that's very important. And that's also where cooking with oils actually comes into play. So it is important to try and cook with a good quality oil, such as olive oil. And if you're using canola or sunflower oil, try to use it at lower temperatures. And then also that's also why we're looking at coconut oil. Coconut oil has been used often because of the fact that it's a saturated fat, which has been thought to be more stable at higher temperatures. But unfortunately, your saturated fats aren't fats that we want to incorporate loads of in the diet. We actually want to try to keep it to the smaller amount and really rather concentrate on having majority of our fat come from unsaturated fat. So try to still stick to your olive oil, for example. And nowadays we get cooking olive oil, which is even more stable at higher temperatures. So that's basically it from me for fat. So it really comes down to a balance. We need carbohydrates, proteins, and fats in the diet in a good balance, and all of them play a different role in the body. And no, it's not as simple as fat makes you fat, and we need to take into consideration that fat really plays a very important role in the body. So we do need to incorporate it, but we need to make sure we are incorporating it in the right balance and making sure we are loading up more on unsaturated fat, which comes from plant products rather than your saturated fats. I hope this has been helpful. Please let us know if you have any questions, and have a wonderful weekend.